Hey everybody, Nick Espinoza, your chief security fanatic here, and in future crime prediction news, it's once again back, and we've got to talk about this. Now, I did a video slash podcast slash radio segment on this about a year or two ago, where we saw basically attempts by some major cities here across the United States to actually apply predictive intelligence via AI to essentially understand where future crime would be. In other words, if it's a high crime area, it would basically spit out to say, yeah, odds are you're going to have more crime. But that led to a lot of different issues, including cries of racism as well as misappropriation of police resources, meaning the police were looking at some areas more deeply than others, et cetera, et cetera. And by virtue of that, it really didn't go anywhere and it was a bit of a mess. And so it's not really happening here in the United States, but it's continuing. And here's what's going on. And for this news, we are going south of the border. Thank you very much, The Guardian, for a decent article on this, and heading to Argentina, because their security forces have announced plans to use artificial intelligence to predict future crimes in a move that experts are obviously saying could threaten citizens' rights. It was the same issue we had here in the United States when this was tried in metropolitan areas. Now, the country's president, Javier Milei, this week created the Artificial Intelligence Applied to Security Unit, and that legislation says that it will use, quote, machine learning algorithms to analyze historical crime data to predict future crimes. Sound familiar? If you're a longtime listener, it really should. Now, on top of this, they also expect to deploy facial recognition software to identify quote-unquote unwanted persons, patrol social media, and analyze real-time security camera footage to detect suspicious activities. This is going above and beyond those attempts that we've had here with this. And if you recall, when it comes to things like facial recognition, we've had false positive issues. And quite frankly, Argentina also has minority populations, not just Hispanic, but Black as well. And so this is going to be an issue. This is why San Francisco, Oakland, and other urban areas have banned facial recognition by use of law enforcement. But that is not stopping Argentina. I don't know if they're not watching these videos or not reading the news, obviously that has wider distribution than I do, about the failures of these things here, but they're pushing ahead. Now, while the Ministry of Security has said the new unit will help protect, or will help to, and I quote, detect potential threats, identify movements of criminal groups, or anticipate disturbances, end quote, this resolution obviously is sending up alarm bells at human rights organizations, both inside and outside the country, those that monitor global geopolitics as well. Experts fear that certain groups of society could be overly scrutinized by the technology, which is literally what happened here, and have also raised concerns over who and how many security forces will be able to access the information. In other words, is it the local police just reviewing footage, of a bank robbery and whatnot? Or is it going to be the intelligence that can whisk people away in the middle of the night? And if you think that's crazy, we're going to get to that. Now, Amnesty International warned that this move could infringe on human rights. Now, according to Mariela Boleski, the executive director of Amnesty International Argentina, and I quote, large-scale surveillance affects freedom of expression because it encourages people to self-censor or refrain from sharing their ideas or criticisms if they suspect that everything they comment on, post, or publish is being monitored by security forces. Again, this is not just about predicting future crime. They're also talking about monitoring social media. And quite frankly, in a country that purports to have a democratic constitution where the people essentially have the right to freedom of expression, if you go on as an Argentine citizen and basically say, I'm not a fan of Javier Milei, and maybe you get angrier, like screw that guy, that kind of thing, are they watching? Are they listening? Gonna get a knock on your door. Now, meanwhile, the Argentine Center for Studies on Freedom of Expression and Access to Information also said that such technologies have historically been used to quote-unquote profile academics, journalists, politicians, and activists. And obviously, that's a huge issue because without supervision, this threatens the privacy of those that essentially would be essentially the fourth estate, those that would keep a government in check, those that would educate others about keeping a government in check, such as the journalists, and those that would educate the population in general through the schools. And that's a huge issue. Now, Milei himself And for the record, he is overwhelmingly considered a far-right libertarian, rose to power late last year, if you recall, and has promised a hardline response to tackling crime. He's done obviously a lot of other things, including financial reforms, which essentially tanked Argentina's currency in favor of U.S. currency, and a whole bunch of stuff. These are drastic, sweeping changes. I don't care if you love or hate the guy. That's simply his policies. Now, his security minister, Patricia Bullrich, reportedly seeks to essentially replicate El Salvador's controversial prison model. And while the administration is moving towards militarizing its security policies, that is obviously a huge thing. And the Center for Legal and Social Studies, basically looking at this, is not a fan, as this is, quite frankly, straight out of the authoritarian playbook, according to them. Now, the government has also cracked down on protests, and riot police recently were shooting tear gas and rubber bullets at demonstrators at very close range. Again, that is something that, rubber bullet can kill, can take out eyes, can break bones. It is a huge thing. Obviously not as lethal as a metal bullet, nevertheless, not good. On top of this, officials were threatening to sanction parents who were bringing children to these marches. In other words, you bring your kids to, let's say, what should have been a peaceful protest, the cops open fire on you, and now you're in trouble for essentially protesting, let's say, reforms you don't like. And again, in a free and open society, that kind of exchange of ideas is essentially 101. It's a big issue. Now, if you know anything about Argentine history, this is where the problems become, because these latest measures have essentially prompted very strong reaction, but they've also started to basically compare to the history of Argentina, and there, quite frankly, is rather dark. There's been a lot of state repression. If you recall, if you're a student of history like I am, roughly 30,000 people in Argentina were forcibly disappeared during essentially the reign of their dictator between 1976 and 1983. Some of these were even thrown alive from planes on so-called death flights. It was basically absolutely an utter nightmare and a mess. And Argentina has since adopted a constitution and democratic standards, and the fear is that President Milei is basically moving in the opposite direction, heading back towards that authoritarianism. So we're going to see what happens there. And again, I don't care if you love or hate the guy, it's simply the politics on the ground. On top of this, back then, thousands were tortured. Children were kidnapped by the dozens. I mean, it was an absolute nightmare. And so nobody wants to see that again anywhere, nor should you. So with that, predictive AI crime or predicting crime via AI is coming back. Not a fan of this. And again, just as a student of history, this has been tried and failed. And quite frankly, in the future, we might see it again, but after it's actually properly been developed, actually after it's been balanced, and actually after we understand the good, the bad, and the ugly with this kind of technology. But if we're going full steam ahead, what you're basically saying is Argentina is going to be turning into a surveillance state, and that's not good for the population, and quite frankly, that's not good for the world. And please like, share, follow me here on Facebook and Twitter at NickAESP, and please feel free to subscribe to me at YouTube as well. And as always, stay safe, stay online, and please attempt to stay private. Thanks, everybody.